when we have a speak up culture, when we have trust, and when we have transparency, we actually disagree more, but we disagree well.
When we have a speak up culture, when we have trust and transparency, we will disagree more, but we will disagree well because we're dissecting ideas and not people, says today's Ask an Expert guest. Hi, I'm Joshua Carlson, co-founder of Propelo Media, and today I sit down with Stephen Shedletzky. Stephen is the founder of Shed Inspires, having worked with big companies like Allstate and Nike. He's also had the pleasure of working with Simon Sinek for over a decade. Stephen's goal in creating this speak up culture is help organizations find new opportunities, find new innovation, and avoid losing market share and potentially losing a business altogether. Now let's hear what Stephen has to say. Shed, thank you so much for coming on Propello Media's Ask an Expert.
I'm delighted to be here. The order is tall. Ask an expert, like, oh no, now what?
Well, we're going to put your feet to the fire a little bit, so I'm sure you'll be
Fair.
able to keep up. I want to start first with what I feel is kind of your genesis story. So, day one of your new career, you're seeing 1,000 people exit a building because massive layoffs. That's not a great environment to go into, and yet it's the environment you had at your doorstep. So, talk about that first day and how that shaped, or at least started shaping, your vision of corporate.
Yeah. So I'm very happy it was my first day because I had a lot of career left.
For sure.
So yeah, I mean, so it was my first job out of college, went through good old campus recruitment. I
Okay.
thought that if I got a job through campus recruitment, I would win career, which
Okay.
is the silliest thing ever. But as human beings, we're a species of comparison. And so
Sure.
as I was in biz school, the thing to do is get a job through campus recruitment without any consideration of like, what is my definition of success and what do I want to pursue? And just because it may not be on the straight path, like that's okay.
Yeah.
But lo and behold, I got a job, large corporation. It was a rotational management, one of these, accelerated leadership programs.
Yep.
Cool. Um, and I was finishing up my last semester of my last year at biz school, and one of my roommates said, "Hey, Steve, check your email. Your company just went through a merger." And I'm like, "Okay, what does that mean?" I got a call the next day. That was a Sunday. The next day was a Monday. I was in one of my favorite classes, which was like a 3 hour public speaking class. It was
Okay.
like 90 minutes break, 90 minutes. And on the first break, I looked at my phone and I'm like, I have a missed call from a mysterious, 905 area code number, which I know like where that is.
Yeah.
Check the message. Hi, Steve. It's Lindsay from HR. Just give me a call back as soon as you can. And I'm like, you're firing me already? Like I haven't even started. Come on. Like, let me mess it up first.
Right.
Um, and I called her back and said, we just want to let you know that your offer of employment is still secure.
Yeah.
Phew.
Yeah, sure.
And then on my first day, which was just after Labor Day in September of 2009, 1,000 people were laid off. It was about a 14,000 person organization. 1,000 people were laid off for synergies,
Yeah. Right.
which we could have the ethical conversation of is that the right thing to do?
Yeah.
But to merging two companies that do something similar, fine.
Yeah.
But I just distinctly remember, Joshua, the feeling of there was a woman in the cubicle next to me. Her name was Brenda, 37-year veteran of the company, and I saw her in trepidation, waiting for her pink slip to arrive. And I saw the impact on not just her work product and her productivity,
Yeah.
but also her mental and physical well-being. And yeah, it was very interesting joining an organization at a tumultuous time. I saw
Sure.
the impact of leaders not knowing what the future was, and instead of being honest about that, they just kind of said nothing. And
Yeah.
how that uncertainty and lack of transparency or openness affected a culture and created um, more uncertainty than clarity. It wasn't a bad or evil place, but it was just interesting. Um, and the employee value proposition that I was recruited upon changed because it was a different company.
Yeah.
And yet no one sort of said, by the way, this is how it's going to change. And so we were just like waiting.
Right.
Um, yeah. I ended up mentoring a number of interns, a disproportionate number of which declined full-time job offers, citing conversations with me. Um, That's called potentially being toxic within a toxic culture, but any negative multiplied by negative is a positive, right? Um,
Sure.
yeah, but a year to the day of my 1 year anniversary at that company, despite being a top performer, they said it's time to go, and I went, I agree.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and through that first job, I was exposed to Simon Sinek's work. A mentor introduced me to Simon Sinek's work.
Yeah.
Did a quick stint at Ernst and Young in change management consulting. Tried to bring in Simon's ideas
Yeah.
into the company. It was Ernst and Young in Canada. They said, "Oh,
How'd
that's
that
interesting."
work?
They said that's interesting. Maybe in a couple years, and I'm like, a couple years. See ya. And I embraced sort of my coaching training, started doing some more leadership coaching and facilitating, and then had a chance to join Simon's team. So I've been working with Simon Sinek for close to 11 years now.
Right.
Had a very involved internal role for about 10 years. I'm still
Okay.
doing speaking and facilitating with them, which is great. And ironically, about 6 years into working with Simon, we formed a partnership with Ernst and Young. And so I actually had an opportunity at the Americas level and even globally to
Yeah.
finally do the thing I wanted to do, which was to help them transform and live their purpose, which is to build a better working world from the inside out. So that was like, I think I chose the right path by accident.
For sure. And we're going to get to it because I feel that there's a story of perseverance and luck that you've alluded to in some of the readings about how that came about. But I want to talk about changing that corporate environment. You gave a great example once about Chanel leadership. When somebody comes in, when they participate in a meeting, that participation is silent for 90 days.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
specifically in there to listen and learn. Can you expand on that?
So I've come across this in two areas. One was a very senior government official in Ontario Public Service. Ontario is the province that I live in here in Canada. I met a very senior civil servant by the name of Shelley Jameson. She did
Okay.
this as well, and Chanel does this too. So there's one thing that the Ontario government has in common with the
Chanel.
fashion icon Chanel. And their rule is for their first 90 days, particularly when you're a senior leader, you aren't allowed to participate in a meeting. You're there to listen and soak in, which I love because how often when you arrive to a new job, you're like, I
Mhm.
have to prove to them that they've made the right choice. And it's
That's the
like,
way everybody feels.
they already made the choice.
Yeah.
Like, just learn. And
Right.
so Shelly did this wonderfully. Someone would come into her office. Literally, it was her first week on a new job. She knew nothing. And someone said, "What do I do with this?" Presented a problem to her. And
Hmm.
she said, "I don't know. You tell me. Like, you're far more intimately familiar with the problem than I am.
Right.
What would you advise that I tell you to do?" They're like, no one's ever asked me that before. She's like, okay, well,
I'm
sit in my
asking.
sit in my seat, like tell me. And they sorted out their problem on their own, and she went, great, like you know more than I do. That sounds good. Let me know how it goes, and if there's any issues, we'll take it from there. But like, great work. That's empowerment.
Sure.
And so Chanel does the same thing. For the first 90 days, you're there to learn and listen and acclimate.
Yeah.
And even these organizations that say like, there's a 3 month probation period. Well, what does that do to one's psyche?
Makes me
Maybe
feel
make
like
it
I'm on the edge.
right. Maybe say for your first 90 days, listen. Then for your next 90 days, then that could be a probationary period.
Right.
But I love that notion of when you arrive, you learn and you listen. Now, I do think that a fresh perspective can often bring really valuable things.
Sure.
Um, uh, but yeah, I mean, I think the best time for our opinion to be heard is when it's asked for, and when it's not being asked for, I think we can offer it. But
Right.
it's just really an intention that you don't have to show up and prove that we made the right choice. We already made it.
Right. So, with that, would you say, as far as the right time to provide an opinion is when asked? Do you think that there's maybe a sweet spot? Maybe 90 days is a bit long, and maybe 30 might be sufficient. Obviously, Chanel's a big organization, and if you're in leadership, there probably is a lot to absorb. But a smaller organization, maybe there's a smaller pre-P period. I won't say the word. We'll just, we got to come
Yeah.
up with a sexier name for it. But is there a balance there?
Yeah, and I think it's based on context. I think that the biggest thing is one of the greatest ways for a new leader to lose trust of their people is to come in and pretend like they know everything and show up to prove. And
Right.
whether the 90 days are religiously practiced or not, I think it's a it's a symbol to say, come in and listen. um and I think there is a time in a space. So one of the leaders that we can all agree, pretty good leader. A lot of leaders out there are polarizing. There's
Yeah.
one who kind of isn't, Nelson Mandela. Like, I think we can all agree, pretty darn good leader.
Yep.
So Mandela was asked, how did you become such a good leader? And he said, I followed my father around because his father was a community leader. He would often travel to other communities and have
Mhm.
community meetings. And he noticed two things. One, every meeting, everyone sat in a circle. In a
Yep.
circle, there's no hierarchy. And so it's a symbol to say we're all equal. The other thing Mandela said is his dad always spoke last.
Mm.
And I think that's the important piece. Whether it's
Okay.
90 days or
Yeah.
30 days or whatever, I think one of the greatest things for a leader to do is
Mm.
listen first, speak last. And it's for two reasons. One, it's a very strategic reason. By the time you speak last, you've literally heard everyone's perspective and you're smarter
Yeah.
and have a more holistic perspective.
Correct.
Um, Two, there's nothing worse than the most senior person hopping into a room and saying, all right, everyone, here's the issue. I need everyone's ideas. Here's mine.
Yeah.
Great, great, boss. Let's do that. And you put people
Yes,
into
you've literally
groupthink,
taken the wind out of the sails.
and you've deprived, it's you've made the stakes higher for someone to have the courage to speak up and share their idea, which could be far out and innovative, but
Sure.
that could be the best idea. So 90 days or not, I think it's contextual, but it's also just this symbol of listen first, speak later.
Yeah, I love that line. That's definitely a good catchphrase. I want to talk about something you have expanded on pretty deeply. You're big on the speak up culture, right? And you are passionate about it, which I love. And you give a couple of examples. So I'm going to give those now. We're going to talk about Boeing, right? The Supermax and the failure
Yeah.
to speak up, resulting in in actual lives being lost. Challenger, another example of this. These are really symbolic and very big ones, and
Yeah.
I think they're interesting because I think it exposes it. But I also think it's interesting too because those two firms have government oversight above them, right? And obviously, when there's loss of life, I don't care if you have government oversight over you. Like, it's going to really bring it up. What do we do to the organizations that I sell sandals, right? No,
Yeah.
nobody's gonna. They're gonna stub a toe if my product breaks, kind of thing. What do we do because everybody's busy? Teams are busy. Organizations are busy. We as people are busy. How
Mhm.
do we slow down? How do we get a firm to take pause? The pause where a plane crashes is instantaneous and everybody feels it. What do we do for the normal everyday firm?
It's a great question. I'm writing a book right now called Speak Up Culture. When leaders truly listen, people step up. And the opening chapter is called What's at Stake.
Okay.
And I literally take people through sort of the play-by-play of what happened at Boeing with the 737 Max 8.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, I mean, the Boeing 737 has been one of I think it's the most widely sold airplane ever.
History. Yeah.
Yeah, first started in 1967. There was no sort of major updates until there was further competition with Airbus predominantly, and Boeing's market share was like near 100% for many years until Airbus came in. And in the 90s, they were kind of neck and neck,
Okay.
50-50. There was the acquisition of McDonnell Douglas, which was really, it was the most weird acquisition ever. They acquired McDonnell Douglas, but then took their leadership team and made them the Boeing leadership team. It's like, what? Let's take a failing company and then put them in charge of an iconic brand that's doing wonderfully. And it was a total sort of Milton Friedman shareholder value. It
Yeah.
was weird. They moved their headquarters from Seattle, where all their factory was, to Chicago, like a physical separation, just
Yeah.
weird stuff.
Right.
And so Boeing came up with the idea, let's update the 737. Let's create a lighter plane, bigger engines, better fuel consumption, better everything. Like it
Yeah.
was almost too good to be true because it
It
was
was
too
too
good to
good
be
to be
true.
true.
And so not only did they say, hey, we have a new 737, better fuel consumption, faster, all the things. It also will require no further training of your pilots
Yeah.
because it's
Right.
just an updated trim, but it
Yeah.
was an entirely new plane. They put bigger engines, which meant they had to put the engines further up. They had to tilt the wings higher. It's legitimately a different plane. They also built in a software system called the MCAS, which they didn't tell anyone about, which there was no backup system, that if one critical element failed, the plane was in a critical fail, nose down, head dive, and
Right.
no one knew how to get out of it. And so if one little thing was off, there was no backup, and your plane's going down, and the pilots are literally fighting against the plane to keep it up.
Right.
Now, orders came flying in because it was too good to be true. There was pressure from airlines like Southwest Airlines, where all 700 of their fleet are all 737s. So they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, bring us a new plane. The first airline, which was Lion Air out of Asia, that had the accident, they literally asked Boeing, can we have training? And Boeing said, no, you don't need it. When the first plane went down, Boeing blamed Lion Air for not having enough training. What? What's up with that?
Yeah. Right.
Um, and so, I mean, this was an extreme example of employees internal knew the writing was on the wall. Too
Right.
many orders, not enough timelines, further pressure. There were like town hall meetings of 100 people pressuring people. You were behind yesterday. You'd say you'd be caught up. Why aren't you caught up?
Yeah.
And people were blowing whistles internally. There's one engineer, Ed Pearson, and if you watch the Netflix documentary on this, they highlight Ed. He's a retired naval officer, and he spoke up. He spoke up to the exact people who could do something, all the way up to all the way up to the CEO Dennis Muhlenberg, general manager of the Renton facility in Washington, to the FAA, like to everywhere,
Hmm.
and it was no one's job. So this is an extreme example. Ed
Yeah.
ends up whistleblowing. They finally shut down the 737 MAX 8 program after a second plane, an Ethiopian Airlines plane, goes down. But your original question is, what does this have to do with a sandal manufacturer, right?
Yeah, I mean it's galvanized when you're talking about a plane crashing, but when we're
Yes.
talking about toe stubs, it's still important. And I
Yep.
understand that as an outsider having this conversation, but when you're inside that organization, how do you galvanize
Yeah.
that importance?
Yeah. As long as you don't wear those sandals on a hike, you're safe, right? Um,
Touche.
yes. So here's the thing. When you have a speak up culture, which I describe as a psychologically safe environment in which people willingly, freely share their ideas, even if half baked, share their concerns, even if they're unpopular, disagree, even with senior leaders, and admit mistake, knowing that the other side of it is improvement. That's
Right.
just a good, healthy, trusting, innovative culture. If you repeatedly ignore or worse, punish people for sharing ideas, concerns, disagreements, or mistakes, you all of a sudden have a culture of silence. And
Yeah.
that silence is not consensus, even if everyone's on mute on Zoom and nodding their heads.
Right.
That silence is dangerous. Now, in the context of an aerospace manufacturer like Boeing or NASA, well, NASA doesn't manufacture, but they go on missions.
Yes.
Or in the context of a surgeon, or military,
Hmm.
stakes are life and death. Um, But if it isn't in that context, the stakes are missed opportunity, missed innovation, potential failure of the firm. However, we know from the National Institute of Health that our relationship with our boss has more of an impact on our health than that of our relationship with our family doctor. And so, though it isn't as immediate, if we have leadership, if we have leaders who are creating unhealthy environments in
Yeah.
which people cannot share their ideas, their emotions, their concerns, their disagreements, or their mistakes for improvements, not only is it bad for the firm from a results short-term and long-term perspective,
Mm-hmm.
but you are actually creating an environment that is less healthy. Go back to Brenda, that person at that first company that I worked
Yep.
a
Yeah.
thousand people let go.
Who's
She was
paranoid in her cube.
paranoid, and
Yeah.
she literally, I saw rates of car accidents and cancers increase, of chronic
Uh,
illnesses and of car accidents and anxiety. I saw it increase just in the 30-person team that I was working in
yeah.
because of corporate culture, lack of leadership transparency, and the fear and the apathy being too high to even voice what it is that we were thinking and feeling.
So a lot of this talk is around leadership, right? Or leader shit. I love that term.
Yeah.
Um, what about the employee side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 2011, I went through an acquisition. It seemed on paper like it was fantastic. It was win-win. I had employees that were excited, and literally day two, we had to lay off a third of the company. And so I had 3 or 4 Brendas that you know the experience. It's horrible. It's the worst thing as a manager to have to do. What do we do as employees that are in an environment where it's not the best? I know it. I know it can be better. You're an Ernst and Young, and you're like, hey, I have ideas. What are the ways that we as an individual employee can help to change that, to change leadership?
So I mean, first and foremost, I think it's a worthwhile conversation of, and I'm not denying you had to or didn't have to, but take me back to the acquisition, and you said we had to let go of a third, or like, tell me more about that. And was it
Sure.
a have to? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just
Yeah,
think it's
so I think it was a have to, interestingly enough. The company was being poorly managed from a cost structure. We'd just gone through the real estate crash, and we tightened the belt, but we just probably didn't do it enough to have a
hmm
healthy balance sheet, right? And so I think it had to happen, but to your point, the way that it happened was horrible. Day one was literally like, yeah, like I mean, it was riveting and it was exciting. And day two was like, I can't, what? Why did we do day one like that? Like
yeah.
that's the worst thing in the world. It was already going to be bad. So why did you get everybody excited before you
Yeah.
chopped it?
Yeah. So I mean, and then tell me. So I have thoughts on that, and then
Sure.
share again what the other question was, so that I.
So basically, from an employee standpoint, right? Brenda
Yes.
specifically, I remember mine was Angie, and Angie, she was literally shaking. I mean,
Yeah.
physically shaking. She was crying, and I knew she was fine, so I went in. But it's not like it flipped a switch in her, right? She's still seeing the bloodbath taking place before her. So
Yeah.
what do we do as employees? Now that's gone, right? Now we're
Yeah.
we're back to our day to day. Everybody's still kind of looking in their rearview mirror, right? Which is horrible. But what
Yeah.
do we do as employees to try to change that culture, to move it in a direction that hopefully prevents that from happening in the future?
Sure. So let's see how we do with this answer, because I think there's lots to it. I mean, first and foremost, leaders hold a deeper responsibility by the fact that they have more influence and power.
Yeah.
And so, you can always Jerry Maguire it, meaning you can write this memo and you can be, expelled like an antibody.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think there's a few things. So one, I think so much of change in organizations is how it's framed and how it's communicated.
Hmm.
To say, day one, we are genuinely excited for this acquisition. We are genuinely excited for the future. And whether it's day one or day two, saying, the balance sheet of an organization is kind of like taking a blood test. And as we look at our blood test, there are some things that show us
Markers.
that
Yeah.
if we continue in this way, the entire firm is going to fail.
Hmm.
And so there are some things that we need to do, um, and be transparent with it. And
Mm-hmm.
one, you can even say, here's where we're going, here's the vision, here's the future. If anyone doesn't want to be a part of that,
Mm-hmm.
let us know and let's have that conversation, because it would be awful to let go of someone who's totally bought in and keep
Yeah.
someone who's going to leave anyway.
Right.
This is what Zappos did when Zappos announced, hey, we're going to holacracy and self-management, which was pretty radical.
Sure.
And I think they knew that uh I'm trying to think of a better term than too fat, but I think that they knew they weren't operating as efficient as they wanted to or
Yep.
could. But they said, this is where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who wants to opt out now, let's have that conversation and we'll buy you out. Zappos also does it where they say
That's their hiring practice too, isn't
that's
it?
also their hiring
Yeah.
practice. I
Right.
forget how long it is. I think it's also 3 months.
Yeah.
So
90
instead of
days.
they switch the probation, like it's both ways. We
Yeah.
should both decide. Like if
Yeah.
after 90 days you're like, nah, I'm good. It's like, great. Like
Here's a
you had the
check.
tour, here's a check, right?
Yeah.
It should be both ways.
Right.
So I think one of the ways is in the way in which we frame it, so that it's not such a bloodbath and people can be at choice,
Mm-hmm.
or it's either that or everyone takes a 33% pay cut. Like what do we want to do here, team?
Yeah. Right. Right.
Um, but when it cut, so that's just a couple thoughts there.
Yeah.
Any
No,
other
no, no. That's,
you
I'd
got
love it.
there?
Yeah.
And sure, like maybe the people you want to keep say, I want to leave, and and you get to have a good, hard human conversation. I
Sure.
also understand that it's harder to do at scale than it is to do at 150 people than it is 15,000. But
Yeah.
anyway, a few thoughts. So, in terms of what can employees do, so, we can always choose to show up and be the leader that we want. That is always a choice.
So
And
be the
so
change you want to see in the world, kind of thing.
we can.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is, I've done work in my career with organizations at a very middle level,
Mm-hmm.
but there was a lot of energy positively to have purpose, to put people first, to like do it right,
Yeah.
have good leadership behaviors, have a great culture. And what happens when you have little pockets of that in time, your standard metrics, profitability, whatever you're measuring, ends up being better. And
Right.
if you have just a little bit of leash and a little bit of time, then the people who care about
It's going to
the
catch an
fine,
eye of sea level, like, hey,
it'll
what's happening there?
right, and then they ask, and then you say, we're putting our people and our purpose first. Can we do that? Sure. Can you teach us? Absolutely. You want a promotion? I'll, I'll consider it.
Right.
Um, and it doesn't always work that way, but I think, you cannot control how anyone outside of you behaves.
Right.
You just can't control it. You can influence it by culture. You can influence it with rewards and recognition. Um, but I think the worthwhile thing to do is to treat people the way you wish to be treated, to treat people the way they wish to be treated.
Yeah.
And here's the fun thing: either you or they eventually will get a promotion, whether it's within the same company or a different one. And we
Right.
don't follow companies, we follow leaders. And so what employees can do is they can strive to lead the way that they wish to.
Mm-hmm.
We always do voice calculus, is what a PhD out of University of Texas, Ethan Burris, calls it. Voice calculus is it worth the risk to my reputation, to my job, to my relationships, to tell people what I really think and feel?
Mm.
And if I do the calculus and I'm like, nah, I'm at higher risk of losing my job. I don't want to lose my job, so I'm
Yeah.
just not going to. And it's the responsibility of leaders to set the tone, and to utilize the two components of a speak up culture, which are encourage and reward.
Okay.
Encourage, encourage, encourage. When someone finally does speak up, you reward them.
Yeah.
Reward doesn't mean you get a promotion and a statue erected in your name. Reward means, thanks, Joshua. That must have been hard to share. Great idea. Keep it coming. We
Right.
didn't implement your idea, but here's why. Let me tell you more about our corporate strategy. Um, so those are the two components. And if you do that, you get a speak up culture. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think employees can still play that long game,
Sure.
because it's really hard. So I'll say one more thing here. So I'm writing a trifecta of chapters, which is leadership defined, select better leaders and support leaders better.
Okay.
So I think we promote people inappropriately in our organizations.
I'm so glad you brought this up.
So the way we typically promote people is we go, who's the highest performing?
Yeah.
Who's the by traditional metrics?
Yeah.
Who's the most driven? Who's the most seemingly responsible? Oftentimes, who's the most extroverted?
Yeah. Right. Right.
And we go, want a promotion. Now, I
Yep.
don't know many people who turn down promotions. Most people do. More status, more pay, more title,
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
Oftentimes we're promoted and now we're in charge of people who did the job that we used to be the best in the room at.
Yep.
And it's a totally different skill set, mindset,
Yes.
and set of attributes. So first and foremost, I think we ought to define what we mean, what a leader does. Because if we define leadership by performance, you're more likely to breed a toxic culture. If you define leadership by trust and define leadership by service, you're more likely to have a healthier supportive culture. So, hey, you want a promotion, and this is what it means. You're no longer responsible for the results. You're responsible for the people who are responsible for the results.
Right.
You're no longer responsible for catching all the fish. You're now responsible for teaching others how to catch fish in their own right, you
Yeah.
know? And your job is to look out for the well-being of your people. Do you want that job? Because by the way, if you don't have weekly touch-ins with your people, if you don't set your people up for success, you will fail in this role. Do you still want the job? Right?
Yeah.
It's like, the decision to have a child is a very quick decision. The real choice is, do you want to change your lifestyle
For the
and
next
raise a
20 years.
child
Yeah.
for the rest of your
Yeah. Right.
life?
Right. Right.
For the rest of your life. And so I think we ought to define what we mean. Then we ought to select people against that definition and then support leaders. There's a gap. So Harvard Business Review did a study. There's a 12-year gap between when the average manager gets their first management job, age of 29, and when they receive their first formal management training, age 41.
Yeah. Well, I've been sitting here saying, where were you 15 years ago? When I was elevated into management, and it was exactly what you just said. And it wasn't until many years later when I was reflecting and talking to a former employee when I realized, man, I was a shitty manager. And it's just like I just didn't have that skill set. I was great at the job,
Yeah.
but I wasn't great at the management job. And that's when I started like reflecting, okay, how can I get better at this? But it wasn't 12 years for me, but it was probably 8. I mean, it was a longer time. I mean, I knew there was a problem, but I couldn't articulate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think it's kind of like there's really nothing you can do to prepare for parenthood other than being a parent. I mean, you can babysit, you can be a camp counselor, you can be a teacher, but like there's really nothing. And I think similarly, leadership, which I think, we can give, whether it's the United Way campaign, a philanthropy thing or something. But the best thing to do for leadership is to get reps. And
Sure.
then to provide people with coaching and training and
Yeah.
education.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think it's enough to say, like, we spend tens and tens of years sometimes studying for these ridiculous degrees in microbiology, and then
Yeah.
someone gets a leadership role to lead other microbiologists, and you're like, good luck, go get them. You know, where's the leadership training? Because it's
Right.
human beings. Like,
Yes.
it's complicated and it's messy and it's gray.
So speaking of complicated, messy, and gray,
Yes.
another case study for you. So I
Hmm.
have a very dear friend who runs a mid-level company, has over 50 employees, and they are been doing it for probably about 4 or 5 years full time, but has been with the firm for 15 plus years. They're burnout. Like they
Hmm.
are literally burnout. And in their role as CEO, they've kind of done it. It's really, they have a partner, the president, that really is the day to day. Their role is more about going around and talking to the employees, keeping their pulse on the firm. But what seems to be happening from an outsider's perspective is that they're absorbing all of the baggage of all 50 plus employees. and it's a
Hmm.
daily struggle. How do you manage that when you're hearing, and a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot, it's maybe some work, but it's a lot personal, right? Because they're just personal in nature, right? I'm talking to you. You have children. We go off on this conversation, and your kid is sick and it's struggling, and obviously that's impacting your work. What do we do to that person to hit reset to approach it slightly differently, so that that baggage doesn't just continue to pile on top of them?
So you're saying, are you saying, so say more about this. Is this like specifically for the CEO, for the president, or just a random, like
it,
say,
it's
say
it's the
more.
CEO that's going around and they're talking to everybody in the firm, right?
Ah,
That is the role that they've really absorbed, and they want to go around and they want their pulse, but unfortunately, sometimes that pulse isn't
yeah.
good, and there's just it's just has a compounding effect.
Yeah. So, I mean, first and foremost, I think any one of us should have no more than about 5 to 9 direct reports tops.
Okay.
And so, I mean, if you even look at the title CEO, like we know what everyone else in the C-suite does. It's in their title.
Yeah.
CMO, CTO, COO, CIO, like we know it all. What the heck does an executive do, right? And what an executive does is so it's two things. They look up and out and they should look to vision and future and
Hmm.
communicate that internally and create partnerships externally to help get there. And as well, they should lead their team. I don't think anyone. I think it is great and healthy if someone wants to check in on people. And 50 is a lot, but it's doable.
Hmm.
But I think we should have weekly one-on-one conversations with our direct reports. It is
Yeah.
impossible to have weekly conversations with 50 people. It's
Yeah.
hard with 7, and then to keep it all straight.
Yeah. Right.
And one-on-one conversations I think it should be weekly, because if you miss one for some reason, holiday, kids sick, whatever, you're then meeting the next week. But if you
Yeah.
book
Right.
it bi-weekly, now you're not meeting with your direct reports until once a month. Like, how's that
Yeah.
going to go? I think it should be
Right.
weekly. And I think the conversation should be 30 minutes, and it should go like this. First and foremost, let's check in. How are you doing? Is there anything you need to say that's impacting you from showing up fully in this meeting? My
Hmm.
kid's sick at home. I might look at my phone. Cool. Whether you're working virtual or whatever it might be,
Yeah. Right.
or in the office. But it's a check-in.
Yeah.
Then it's, hey, last week we agreed that this would be done. I'm
Yep.
a much bigger believer in agreements and accountabilities. I think
Okay.
accountabilities are assigned, agreements are mutual.
Okay.
Um, where are we on that?
Yep.
And then what are we agreeing to will be done by next Thursday when we have our next one-on-one. And by the way, if we get to our next one-on-one and the things that we agreed upon both ways
Yeah.
aren't accomplished, we shouldn't be letting one another know on Thursday.
Yeah.
Let's set up a Tuesday end of day email to say, I'm on track, I'm on track, I'm on track, need help. This got added to my plate. You know, that way by the time Thursday rolls around, we're not in a surprise. Um, but I think that's how it should go. And first and foremost, it's check-in and it's care.
Yeah.
Um,
It
so
sounds like
I
that's happening, but it sounds like probably it's the agreement aspect. It's then followed by the accountability that's probably deficient.
and if so, let's say you report to me, or vice versa. I report to you, and it's been 3 weeks in a row, and something that we've agreed upon still isn't happening.
Right.
Then we go, hey, like, I know you don't want to let me or anyone down. Like, what? Like, something's not working there.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, I really hate doing that thing. Like, it is not aligned with my strengths,
Right.
and I'm really finding a hard time with discipline on getting that one done, Or I haven't told you, but my dad has COVID and he's in a care home and it's really
Right.
impacting. And now I have an opportunity to be a decent, pardon my French, fucking human being and be like, how can I show up for you? Because if I do, I know in time that'll come back with rewards from loyalty. Like,
Right.
come on, put myself in that person's shoes. But then we can have a real honest conversation. Like, Josh, I really wish you would have told me because I didn't know that about you. Part of that's on me.
Yeah.
But you know what? Nancy rocks at that stuff. Let's invite Nancy to our next week's one-on-one, or let's do
Yeah.
a meeting. Let's see what her workload is like. And let's meet with her manager and see if we can actually transfer it. Um, But yeah, I think for your friend who's a CEO, you know, constantly checking in on 50 people, that's just too much. You
Yeah.
need at least a layer of management.
Right.
And then you've got to be careful because if you have a relationship with one of those 50 and there's a skip level and someone comes to you and skips their manager,
That
you can
creates a,
support them,
yeah.
but you need to. So I have a client who's a CEO. It was during COVID. Someone came from they're in office manufacturing and a distribution facility,
Okay.
and they're in delivery. Somebody came to the CEO's office. It's a skip level, so the person reports into one of her direct reports, and he said, "Hey, I have an idea for we should do a smaller delivery truck for this reason." Blah blah blah. And she's like, "That's great. Run with it." And he did, and her direct report was like you
Yeah.
totally
Right.
undermined me,
Yeah.
and she's like, what should I have done? Now I knew the answer, and I'm like, well, I'm glad you asked, but I was smart enough to say, what would you have done differently next time?
Yeah.
And she said, what I have done differently next time is I would have empowered him. I would have said, hey, have you shared this with your manager?
Yeah.
Now if he said yeah and I got kiboshed, well then there's a different conversation to
You
have,
know how to approach it.
right? Or they go, no, haven't. It's like, go for it. You need any coaching on how to have that
Approach. Yeah.
conversation? But like, go for it and let me know how it goes. I think it's a great idea. Or maybe you shouldn't say that because then it's bias. It's like, I see the merit in what you're bringing, but I don't know the full
Right.
story,
Yeah. Yeah.
But let me know how it goes. Um, so,
I feel like
uh,
an underlying theme here is transparency on both sides, right? Because without that, there's baggage behind that we're all carrying around and it's influencing how we're communicating, how we're working. Whereas if we just like clear the table and say, okay, all right, now I
yeah.
get it. Now I have an appreciation for your perspective, and you probably have a better appreciation for my perspective because I'm being honest as a manager too.
And we need trust for that, and we need a healthy culture that if I tell you how I'm really feeling or thinking and then you use that against me, guess what, never going to happen again,
Yeah, right.
right? And so we need to establish um, a culture of trust, of
Mhm.
transparency. I mean, one of my top values, I like to call it make the implicit explicit. Like if you're
Okay.
trying to like coach me and give me feedback, but you're not kind of telling me the whole thing,
Yeah.
and it's like, hey Shed, we've got feedback that like this, that this is happening, but we're not going to tell you who it was or what happened or any of the specifics. And I'm like,
Right. I'm in a
what can I
vacuum.
do with that? Like help me help you, be real.
Yeah.
But if we have trust and if we know that information isn't going to be used against us,
Yep.
um, there's a brilliant study done by Amy Edmondson, who's like the founding mother of psychological safety, where this is how she first came across psychological safety and found its merit. She was studying populations of emergency rooms in hospitals,
Okay.
and one of the things she was looking at was the number of medical errors reported. And in areas in hospitals where there was high trust, high psychological safety, and a speak up culture, there were more medical errors reported than in the ones where there was not psychological safety, trust, or a speak up culture. And
What's
she's
that
like,
about?
what?
Yeah.
It's number of medical errors reported.
Ah,
When you know that mistakes are viewed as data points for improvement and
yes.
you aren't going to be ridiculed,
Yep.
reprimanded, punished, or fired, you're like, I messed that one up. When you have a culture of fear, where if you make a mistake, you're fired, guess what? I didn't put the sponge in
Issues
his
don't get
liver,
reported. Yeah,
right?
right.
It wasn't on me.
Yeah,
So it's not that the issue didn't happen, it's not reported. And we're now spending inordinate amounts of our time or energy hiding mistakes from each other.
right. That's fascinating.
So when we have a speak up culture, when we have trust, and when we have transparency, we actually disagree more, but we disagree well.
Right,
We
right.
can have
Constructively.
it's constructive. We
Yeah,
don't dissect people, we dissect ideas.
right.
you know Josh, help me see what you're seeing here. I don't see it,
Yep.
which isn't a your idea is stupid. It's a I value you.
Yes.
Like like I'm not following you yet.
Yeah,
Then when you say it, it's like I actually have a counter view. Can I share? And that, like, it's additive
right.
as opposed to destructive.
Interesting. All right, I want to move into quickfire round. I have
Sure.
more questions, but we do have a hard stop, so we're going to get through the quickfire. Maybe we'll get one more. Favorite podcast right now?
Ooh, Work Life from Adam Grant.
Okay, we'll definitely check that out.
Yeah.
Who is your professional inspiration?
Adam Grant. My professional inspiration, I would say a few people right now. So I do look up to Adam Grant and his work. He's the author of Give and Take, Wharton Biz Prof. Amy Edmondson, for sure, PhD out of Harvard, and she put psychological safety on the map. I would also say Satya Nadella out of Microsoft. I think he's doing a really wonderful job of transforming Microsoft for the better and putting empathy and human spirit first.
Okay. Favorite book? Recent book? It's topical.
Yeah, How to Begin by Michael Bungay Stanier.
Okay.
Yeah,
Former
he's
guest of the show.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Michael is brilliant,
Yes, he
and
is.
he writes easy to understand, easy to action upon, funny, mind blowing books, and it's a representation of him and his personality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Early riser or burn in the midnight oil?
Yes.
Both. I think that might be my first both.
I lean more towards Burn the Midnight Oil.
Okay.
I often find that my best ideas happen when I'm not getting all the notifications and pings, which
Yeah.
is a better design for trying to turn it off. But I can also, I mean, I have a 6.5 and a 3.5 year old, so I have found myself working on stuff at 4 and 6 a.m. just because I'm up.
You gotta adapt.
Yeah.
Favorite pizza?
Uh, Bacon on it. If there's bacon on it, I'm enjoying it.
How, so just a bacon fan, bacon on donuts. Are you a fan of that as well?
I would do bacon on donuts. Yes.
It's fabulous. If you
My
haven't, you,
my
you need to have that. So
yeah, my diet plan says contrary. Fortunately, I put the ish in Jewish, so I'm very happy to have bacon.
okay.
But yeah, I mean, favorite pizza, thin crust,
Okay.
and bacon on it.
Okay. So you brought it up earlier. I think this was maybe a good place to wrap. You were fourth employee for Simon. You said a lot of perseverance and some luck. So I want to talk about each one of those because I'd just love to hear that story.
Sure. So I mean, I fell out of love and was lost in my career very early on, and it was terrifying. I
Yeah.
saw all of my peers out of biz school, pursuing whether it's accounting or management consulting or an industry and like thriving, and I was struggling and lost.
Yeah.
And it was hard. Now, what I now realize in reflection is, I was living a career that was outside of my set of values and beliefs, and I needed a chiropractic readjustment of my soul and my fulfillment.
Okay.
Huge inspiration of mine is my grandfather, who's a Holocaust survivor.
Okay.
And when I was really struggling in my career, I thought about what he was doing at the same age, and
Yeah.
the answer was hiding in barns and cornfields from Nazis in rural Poland.
Yeah.
And I knew that sort of gave me the courage. Like, I have one life, I have one career. I got to figure out what I care about and then go after it.
Yeah.
And I knew enough because I had enough sort of great experiences in university and college to know that I cared about what it really means to be a leader,
Hmm.
not being in charge, but taking care of those in your span of care. I enjoyed speaking and facilitating and coaching. I kind of knew enough, and I just went to go connect with people who were doing that.
Okay.
And fortunately, that led me to being introduced to Simon Sinek's work. Someone sent me his TED talk. I procrastinated for 2 months, then watched it, loved it.
Yeah.
And I was starting to write down, golden circles on napkins and explaining to anyone who would listen. Funny enough, when I left a couple stable corporate jobs, my grandfather, who was still alive at the time, he was like 95, called me up and saying, "What are you doing leaving all of these successful jobs and, good corporate tracks? Do you know how much I've sacrificed to give you and your family an opportunity to have life?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And
That's in fact inspiring me.
yes. And I said, and we call him Zadie. I said, "Zadie, you were an entrepreneur." He was a butcher. I said,
Okay.
"You only worked for somebody else in your life for 6 months." I'm like, "I'm following in your footsteps. I'm doing this because of you. Like,
Yeah.
I have one career, I have one life. I have to make it count." And I kind of stumped him, and he went, "Fine. just don't sell drugs. And I'm like, no problem there. Like, we're good. So I was introduced to Simon's work, and I literally went to a conference in Toronto, the Art of Management. This would have been in November of 2010. So
Okay.
pretty early days for Simon. His TED Talk had just kind of come out.
Yeah.
Um, and I went to a conference to hear Malcolm Gladwell speak, and Simon spoke just before him.
Okay.
And the sort of passion and connection I felt with him watching him on a screen was only amplified in a room. And I was right time, right place. Um, I ended up building a relationship with him online, with his small team,
Yeah.
and just kept showing up. And then, I've become obsessed, Josh, that like all of our successes in our careers have something to do with other people and other
Yeah.
people wanting to take a risk on us, whether it's a first hire, a first employee, a
Yeah.
first client, a first customer, a life partner. People need to see that we're worth investing in.
Yeah.
And so I became very obsessed with what are the conditions I'm creating to want for others to want to take a risk on me. And fortunately, I just kept showing up, I think, for mostly the right reasons with Simon's team. And they had an opportunity and they offered it to me to first do our Start With Why podcast with them and then fill somebody else's shoes as they were going in to do becoming what we call an igniter, to be a speaker and facilitator on Simon's team. And
Okay.
so I just kept showing up. So it was definitely perseverance and stick to itiveness and some
Yeah.
LUCK.
Yep.
Um, and uh, Simon's former CEO, Kim, said to me when I first met her, we went for a walk in Dumbo, Brooklyn, and she said to me, "You will either do this with us or without us, and we hope it's with us." And I've done it with them for the past decade plus, and
Yeah.
it's been an amazing ride, and I'm so grateful for it.
That's a beautiful story, and it's a story I want to share with every parent because I want every parent to share that with their kids, right? Be passionate about something and don't give up, right? If it's really if it's really your calling, just please pursue it I don't want to say at all costs, but at a calculated cost, continue to pursue it because it just fulfills your life so much better.
And you'll find a way to make it work, even if it's hybrid, even if you're moonlighting it. But, when we feel connected to something that is in line with our strengths and what we care about, like that is fulfillment. And I think we all deserve it and we all can do it. So uh, even if it's on the side until it becomes the main thing, or maybe
Right.
it's always on the side, but it just makes the main thing better and more bearable.
More powerful. All
Yeah.
right. Well, this is a good place to stop. We are going to have you back because we do have lots more to talk about. But Shed, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise, it was a treat. I hope we can share one of those beers in the back next time we meet, hopefully in person. And this was great. Look forward to the next.
That sounds fair.
Cool.
Thanks everyone for enjoying today's episode with Shed. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but we're definitely going to have Shed back. So stay tuned for a follow-up episode in the near future. Please like, rate, subscribe, do all those things. It helps us genuinely increase the viewership for the show. The more eyeballs we have, the more interviews we can do. The more interviews, the more we can help you. So as usual, I hope you enjoyed this episode and I hope it helps propel your business forward. So with that, have a fantastic day and we'll talk to you again soon.